Order. There we are. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning to the witnesses. And this is the oral evidence session of the Welsh Affairs Committee looking at energy in Wales. Now, I'm conscious this is a very, very broad topic, and so we're just focusing primarily today on the foremost, the most pressing barriers to renewable development in Wales at the moment, and how GB Energy might influence the development in Wales. But I'm very conscious this is just, if you like, the beginning. It's almost like a taster session of where we're at and looking at energy in Wales. So it's not the end, please, don't think that. It is very much part of our bigger look at energy as we go through next year, 2025. So before I ask our witnesses to introduce themselves, I'm going to ask members to declare any interest they may have that are relevant to today's session. Anne Davies.
I have one interest. I'm co-chair of an anti-pylon group in Llanarthne, which is in Carmarthenshire.
Thank you, Anne. Any other interests? Nope, that's brilliant. Okay, so may I welcome on screen Jessica Hooper, and in the room we've got Sheppard, Joe Rossiter and Benedict Ferguson. And I'd like you to introduce yourselves, just very briefly, a one-liner just to say who you are and why you're here today. Shall I start with Jessica, please?
Thank you. So I'm Jess Hooper. I'm Director of RenewableUK Cymru. So RenewableUK is a trade association of about 500 members representing wind, tidal and crucially supply chain. We work cross borders, hence me being the Director of the Cymru office.
Thank you very much. Sheppard.
I'm Project Manager at Marine Energy Wales, with the industry representative body for the offshore renewable energy sector in Wales. We've got a diverse membership of about 100 organisations that are working to develop projects and be part of the supply chain for Welsh offshore renewable projects.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming today. Joe Rossiter.
Morning. So I'm co-director at the Institute of Welsh Affairs. So Wales is leading independent think tank, and we've worked on energy for almost a decade now.
Brilliant. And then Benedict Ferguson, please.
Good morning, Borada. Yes, I'm Benedict Ferguson. I'm Co-Executive Director of Community Energy Wales, where the industry body, the voice of the community energy sector in Wales. We have around 50 members, most of whom are community energy organisations. They're not-for-profits who have developed, built, own and operate renewable energy assets in local places and return 100% of the profits from those assets to the community.
Thank you very much. And I should have said at the beginning, my name is Ruth Jones and I'm member for Newport West and Eastline, but I'm also chair of the Select Committee, which is why I'm sat here. That's fine. So if it's all right with you, I'm going to start off with a question maybe to Jessica and to Jay. First off, just basically, could you outline to me the key barriers that prevent the expansion of large-scale renewable energy capacity in Wales? You know, we're talking about large-scale off the east coast of England. What are the barriers that are stopping us going through it in Wales? And is it just that these challenges are unique to Wales, or are they part of a wider picture? And also, obviously, we're very worried that Wales might miss the boat in terms of this, so we might miss the benefits of GB Energy because of these challenges. Can I ask Jessica to start, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Ruth. So there's a number of key challenges that we face as a sector, unfortunately. I think first and foremost, we have to mention grid. I would then say public perception and support. Hello, Anne. Good to see you again. There's obviously a key link between public support and grid that we'll probably touch on. And then I think from a Welsh point of view, probably consenting as well. I think across those three, they're strategic in their nature and they affect all renewable technologies coming forward, unfortunately. The fundamental one that underpins it all has to be grid. And I think you asked whether or not it's unique to Wales. Grid is by no means unique to Wales. I think the most unique aspect for Wales is that 2/3 of the country doesn't have any transmission grid, and that's fundamental for getting clean green electrons away. I see a role, or we see a role, I think, from GB Energy in potentially incentivising development where grid constraints mean projects aren't coming forward. So there's a strategic line called PSNC, catchily named, that would join the north and south coasts of Wales, coming through Mid Wales. And I think the role of GB Energy potentially is to support projects in Mid Wales and improve the business case there, thereby increasing certainty of likelihood of projects for NESO and National Grid to make the commitment to bring that transmission network forward. if I touch on public perceptions, then I think, so there was a very good report produced by Public First on the role of GB Energy, and it goes into quite a bit of detail around how public support tends to increase if the public sector is involved. So there's a fundamental role potentially for GB Energy here in targeting partnerships with projects where we want to drive the public support envelope. If we can increase community support through a public company that's maybe seen as a more trusted body, and move away from that very strong perception that energy is extractive, through national ownership coupled with a key role in championing domestic content, there's a very real opportunity to enhance public perceptions of renewables and bring them forward more quickly. And then thirdly, consenting. So again, probably not unique to Wales, but I think the aspects that we're touching on today around onshore and nearshore projects, the consenting parameters are almost entirely devolved. Anything up to 350 megawatts sits within Welsh Government remit. And whilst we are seeing increased efforts to address resourcing constraints, they do prevail and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. That is linked both to resourcing of our consenting bodies and indeed Welsh Government, but also then in terms of policy interpretation, where we're seeing not a lack of clarity of policy, how we as a sector can take policy specifically potentially relating to peat, for example, and utilise that in our consent applications is not clear. The role for GB Energy there, I think, unfortunately, peat is probably going to be a problem across the UK. It's not going to be unique to Wales, but the way in which we're seeing policy brought forward in Wales is potentially unique. If you compare Scottish Scottish rollout of policy specific to peat, it's quite different to that in Wales. Renewables are afforded a sort of priority status in Scotland, whereas in Wales we're not seeing that. So potentially a sort of unified Welsh Government, UK Government drive to enhance the priority of renewables would be fundamental in enabling that, I think.
Thank you, Jessica. That's a very comprehensive answer. Jade, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of the points that Jess has made there, but perhaps provide a little bit more context for the marine renewable energy sector. So grid, as we've already talked about, is a big issue. There's perhaps a geographic nuance there in that we know where the resource is for tidal, for example, off the Welsh coast. For example, there are potential deployment zones off the coast of the Llyn Peninsula, off the coast of Pembrokeshire, where we just don't have the grid infrastructure on the shore side in order to bring that energy ashore. So there needs to be targeted investment close to deployment zones to ensure that we can bring energy back ashore. Environmental consents, with this being devolved within Wales, adds an extra layer of complexity. It is a time-consuming process that adds a layer of risk to developers. So I think GB Energy, through the Crown Estate Partnership, has the potential to help de-risk that process and reduce costs and time for developers if they were to ensure that there's some environmental baseline evidence gathering pre the lease process, so that a developer can then take on a lease and be able to progress through the consents in a much more timely manner with lower risk of there being delays or setbacks as part of that process. Access to private finance is another challenge for many of the marine renewable energy developers in Wales. We know people that are trying to develop projects that are looking for anywhere between 4 million and 30 million of investment. There's a bit of a mismatch there between the institutional finance offerings that are available, in that you need to be kind of applying for at least 30 million to be worth the due diligence to attract finance through UKIB, for example. So perhaps there's a role there for GB Energy to play in bringing in seed funding. From our engagement with prospective investors, they want to see a major equity investor come on board first in order to incentivise debt finance. So GB Energy could play a role in attracting further investment into some of these projects. And I'd like to just kind of present like the Morlice project as a bit of a case study. Some around the table will be aware of this project already, but through major investment from both the European Union and Welsh Government, we have a tidal stream zone where we have the grid substation already developed, we have the environmental consents already in place, and this offers an offering to tidal stream developers where there's reduced cost and reduced risk in getting their technology in the water. And I think that this is a model that could be replicated with additional funding to support floating offshore wind, tidal range and wave energy projects in Wales as well.
Thank you, Jay. That's helpful. David, did you want to come in there?
Yes, a question really for Jessica and Jay, I suppose. A number of leading Welsh academics and political commentators, Will Hayward is just one example, have written quite extensively about the potential rewards from tidal energy and believe that Wales is sort of ideally placed to be the starting hub for this industry. Do you agree with that? Are we missing an opportunity there? And how generally, how do the benefits from onshore wind compare to the potential benefits from tidal energy?
So are we talking about tidal stream or tidal range or both within both? Okay, so for tidal stream then, we've seen quite a few projects developed around the UK already. There have been quite a few that have been deployed, particularly in Scotland. Historically, we've seen tidal stream projects delivered with anywhere between 80 and 100% UK content, compared to about 20% for wind. So that means, on average, we will see 4 to 5 times the level of socioeconomic benefits per pound spent on tidal compared to wind. So we make a lot of this kit in the UK, whereas a lot of the wind supply chain has been developed in places like Denmark and Germany. So at the moment, we're at this kind of first mover advantage in the UK, and if we invest and support these projects now, then we're going to see large economic benefits and potentially export technology globally as well.
Yes,
yeah. And then for tidal range as well, I'd just say that we've got massive resource, both on the north coast and on the south coast of Wales, but particularly in the Severn Estuary, second highest tidal range in the world. So that area is ripe for development and can provide clean, predictable power very close to major demand centres as well.
A couple of things I'd add, if I may. Onshore wind, obviously, not doing so well on the socioeconomic benefit side of things. I think the fundamental thing there is that they're shovel-ready projects. They can deliver between now and 2030. Tidal, in reality, isn't going to come in significant proportions until the sort of 30s. Similarly, for floating offshore wind. I would also say that as an emerging technology, floating wind carries a lot of potential advantages for us. Becoming a global leader, we've already got more projects in UK waters than anywhere else in the world at the moment. So harnessing that as a possibility and bringing it forward takes it slightly away from your question, but I think that there are strategic links there in terms of harnessing and anchoring opportunities in Wales that we can capitalise upon. I would also mention that there is a fundamental link here through our port infrastructure. So port infrastructure is going to be fundamental to getting any kit offshore. And we've seen some investment, but there is a lot more investment that is required. And there's a real opportunity for GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund to potentially direct funds into our ports. Welsh ports, both North Wales and South Wales have ports that are already experienced in some of this, or that have significant capacity to support emerging technologies going forward.
Onshore wind is shovel ready, but not as good.
Onshore wind is shovel ready. It probably doesn't deliver the supply chain benefits at the scale that Jay referenced there. But I think the fundamental thing to note is that we're already delivering community benefit funds into Wales of approximately 20 million per annum. 6.5 million per annum. But the potential pipeline that we see represents a 20 million opportunity of community benefit funds coming directly into our communities in Wales.
Just to come back on the timescales for tidal then, and just to clarify that we've got 38 megawatts of tidal contracted to be delivered by 2029 in Wales. It's quite small when we're talking about the net zero transition, but that's expected to grow and expand well into the 2030s. So I'll caveat any kind of concern that this might not be delivered until the next decade. We're at that kind of embryonic stage of the industry now where support will really help build and maintain those supply chain opportunities as tidal stream grows.
Thank you very much.
Just to add a sort of socioeconomic figure there.
Sorry, Jessica, I'm going to close you down there because I'm conscious we've got a lot of questions to get through.
Okay.
And I'm going to hand over to Andrew Ranger.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to move on to looking at sort of how community energy plays into this now as well. So probably to Benedict first, and then maybe Joe after that. So obviously we've got the UK government committed to making Britain a clean energy superpower, and the Welsh government is aiming to achieve 70% of its energy consumption from renewables by 2030. So just how much of a role do you envisage that community energy will have to play in reaching those targets? And what are the challenges that it faces in developing those projects at pace?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, the challenge is key into some of the challenges that we've heard, the wider challenges, like grid connection, planning, those sort of things. They tend to be compounded for community projects because we have less choice about where we are. We can't spread risk across a portfolio, and we can't choose where our community is. We have to find those renewable energy resources and find what the grid looks like there and connect to that. And then we've got State of the Sector report coming out this year, which is starting to find evidence then as well of how pinched the market conditions are for the community sector. So we're not able to compete for rents against other activities on land like forestry and where land falls within LDP allocations for housing, that sort of thing. So there's sort of competition there. And those market conditions, just to go back and say, we had feed-in tariff. Most of our members that have projects now, they built their projects in the time of feed-in tariff. That's where the profitability comes from. And since then, we've been really, really stuck. We're in a bit of a chokehold in the market conditions. So, whereas larger projects and projects at scale might have access to CFDs, we don't have, any subsidy support, and we have those compounded problems with grid. We're seeing issues in the grid queue, for example, where we think that it would be helpful. GB Energy might help to support the idea of a bit more flexibility from the DNOs around communities placing the grid connection queue. But also, I'll come back to that point around consistency of support. The other perspective on grid is we see it from the different end. We're looking at distribution. We're often connecting to distribution. And yes, there is a very serious barrier with getting large-scale generation connected to transmission so that it can come down. But if our decarbonisation pathway is moving towards large-scale use of electrical power for heat and for transport, as well as the traditional power that we're using, then we've got a real problem with actually getting that down the distribution network to users. So we really feel that the role that community energy's got there is in mitigating the risk of that decarbonisation pathway with local energy trading, right, so that we can get balancing benefits. And we're very close, actually, to having good market conditions for that. So GB Energy could certainly support Ofgem to adopt Elexon's modification P441, which will allow for local energy trading. That's called creation of complex site classes. That will help us to start building multiple generators behind substations that can connect to customers. They can then give customers a cheaper price for their energy and receive a higher price than market for their energy. Now we can finance more projects, and we can start to really scale up the projects and create a virtuous cycle. As more demand comes online, we can bring more generation online, balance that behind a substation, and reduce the actual impact on the infrastructure pathway in terms of both the cost and the time risk. So we just feel it's really, really important to get support for Ofgem to adopt P441, get that going. Then there'll be a problem coming after that for licensed energy suppliers, who will have a challenge with resourcing, facilitation of those markets, doing the balancing and settlement and creating the billing structures for that. We have got some support in some pilot projects, but they haven't scaled up quick enough. So I think, possibly some support in terms of looking at investigating the costs of licensed energy supplier in actually investing in and setting up those systems. Possibly what could come behind that would be some kind of floor price mechanism that supported local energy trading, for a startup phase while we get that up to scale. So we think that's the most important thing that we could do. And frankly, business as usual is going to keep community energy in a bit of a chokehold. Unless we can create better market conditions. Our members are doing all sorts in the way of innovation, and they're showing a lot of resilience, a lot of flexibility, looking at smart local energy systems, working with Only Cymru around that, looking at private wire solutions, looking at behind-the-meter solutions, but they've really got to be sort of opened up for us to get to scale. If they are, I think that the targets are that we currently have are not nearly big enough, and we should be much, much more ambitious. And we can really start to dig into fuel poverty if we can provide cheaper energy, and we can really start to dig into, I think, that piece that's been referred to already about a degree of pushback against the net zero agenda, communities feeling left behind and forgotten, feeling that they're not actually seeing a direct benefit to them now of all of this action on climate change. Local energy markets can give them that agency, that value from their smart meter, the ability to make informed use of their own data that they're generating. So I'll stop there.
Can I just, and thank you very much for that. Before Mr Rossiter comes in to answer, can I just make a plea for briefer answers? We have to finish this session at 10 to 11, so I'm conscious we have a lot of questions to get in. So if we could be brief, that would be really helpful. Andrew Ranger.
Thank you very much. Did you have anything to add to that, Joe?
Yeah, just to zoom out a bit is that, you know, one of the great positive things that this renewable energy transformation is meant to deliver is a decentralisation of where we get our energy from, and community energy has a really key role to play in terms of not only getting people on side for this transition, whether that means through getting involved in, you know, community energy themselves or tangibly benefiting from this transformation, you know, and we need to see those kind of positive community benefits fairly quickly if we're going to deliver at such a pace. So there's that. There's also the economic redistributive element of community energy, and giving people a bit more of a say and agency in what their energy futures look like is a really powerful thing. And when we look at GB Energy, obviously it's what role can that play at the moment? It's kind of doing all things to all people, because everyone can see bits of it that they think is really positive, and, you know, can talk to those, but actually it can have a key role in trying to support community energy projects, for example. It's not necessarily just the kind of enabling the initial finance for large scale projects, but it's also that other side of things of investing in a way that Welsh Government can't for those smaller and community projects.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
Want to ask?
I'll move on to my next question. Yes.
Yeah.
So, slightly changing the context. So this is probably towards Joe and Jessica. Obviously, we've got GB Energy and we've got Inni Cymru. So is there a risk that there might be some duplication there? And which are the best ways that the two governments can work together to make those two work to hit the targets, ensure they get the successful rollout across both countries or the whole country, and how can any risks of that duplication be averted?
I start.
Please, yeah.
Just on that, you know, touching on the lack of understanding of what GB Energy is at the moment, and even over the last, you know, from being a manifesto commitment through to something that is tangible and deliverable, is a step. And at that point, it's come from, you know, this is going to be a publicly owned renewable energy developer to something more approaching, you know, a wealth fund that enables, you know, private sector to get on board and de-risk some of those larger infrastructure spends. In regards to how it can work with Welsh Government, I think it's critically important that not only do Welsh Government have a voice, but also that there are deliverers in the room. It's not just political representation. You know, there's value in having the Secretary of State for Wales in the same room at cabinet meetings and when the mission board are discussing these projects. But equally, you need some form of Welsh deliverers of policy, not just the political, which I think is critically important. In regards to GB Energy, you know, we need, in order for it to be successful, we need a sharp focus. We need well-defined mandate and strong governance which respects that. The energy pathways in different parts of the UK will look very different, and indeed it should look very different in order for people to meaningfully benefit, and for different nations of the UK and even regions within nations to have a different direction of travel that suits what the population want. So I'll stop there to be brief.
Okay, no, great, thank you. And to Jessica, you got anything to add to that, please?
A couple of points of clarity, really. So Inni Cymru has a very strategic focus on community projects. Welsh Government have also pursued Trydan Gwir Cymru, which is probably more equivalent to GB Energy. And I think we would really advocate for close working between TGC and GBE, but also, as Joe mentioned, working with Welsh Government to ensure that there isn't duplication and competition. I think there's a real opportunity for the interaction between GB Energy and the organisations that are already set up. I think Welsh Government would be keen for me to say Wales feels that, you know, we're ahead of the game in terms of a lot of the groundwork and foundations that have been laid in this area, and working with those, so bringing more money into them is going to represent greater opportunity for Wales and Welsh people, is potentially going to deliver more megawatts onto the grid faster. Wales is in a really good position, but potentially needs more help with delivery on the ground. And I think there's also a lot of work gone into understanding electricity demand across Welsh Government, and how we, I suppose, match up the understanding of the supply opportunities and the necessary infrastructure support that will be fundamental in the two of them working together to bring projects forward, as I touched on in my first answer.
Just to slightly flip it on its head, is there an importance that actually they should also differ in their approaches to cover more ground?
I think, as Joe alluded to, we don't actually have that much clarity on GB Energy's role at the moment, and I think there's an opportunity for really clear strategies and clear portfolios that can be well understood by the market. I think the point of interpreted differentiation to date has been that TGC is more focused on developing its own land. We're anticipating GB Energy will be more open to working with the private sector to bring projects forward. So those sorts of ownership models, they're not unusual in the sector, so the private developers that we already have in Wales will be very comfortable with that as a model, sort of working in JVs. I think leveraging the funding that's been set aside for this, you're going to need to work with the sector to really maximise it, multiply it, and get those multiplier effects. And it's where the experience currently is as well.
Great, thank you.
Can I just come in with one thing that you sparked me off? Is that it's quite interesting that one of the key things that has been delivered very initially from GB Energy is this partnership with the Crown Estate, and I think that's quite an interesting one in that Welsh Government position is that they're calling for the devolution of the Crown Estate, as is the case in Scotland, and that is the first programme that GB Energy has committed to co-investing is an interesting one when you think about what that means for that collaborative approach between governments. Sorry to interrupt.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. My question is about community benefit, actually, and perhaps I'll ask Joe and Ben this, but, feel free to come in with any of you. I think, let's be frank, really, the days of community benefit where companies are sponsoring rugby shirts, for example, as much as that's appreciated throughout the whole of Wales, is over. We need tangible community benefits for people and for communities. And for me, one of the most tangible community benefits would be to underground transmission cables rather than having pylons. So, and that's a personal view, and I take that's not everybody's view. But what I want to know is, how do you see a tangible community benefit for the communities in Wales that are having not only the wind farms but also the pylons that are coming through the valleys?
Shall I come in first and then yeah. So in regards to that, I agree that community benefit funds are one way that has been the case to date of basically ensuring that there's some link to a community benefiting. However, the way that they're delivered is different for different projects. The governance of those are different between different projects, and what we'd like to see is a bit more of a tangible commitment to communities that are the sites of renewable energy infrastructure, especially when to date what we've seen is that some of Wales's most communities that are suffering from deep poverty, fuel poverty, and have also had borne the scars of what is an extractive previous energy generation, is that you need to make sure that there is a tangible community benefit. And from our point of view, what that looks like is trying to put conditionality into the contracts that you are engaging with the larger renewable energy developers. What that might look like is tangible ownership, so that people feel it in their back pocket when a renewable energy project comes online. Also ensuring that communities see some form of money come into their back pocket in terms of ensuring that they have some degree of community and local ownership, but also ensuring that they have some percentage of some of the profits of what these companies are getting over the medium term. So we think that's really important, and also ensuring that some money comes back into the public purse that is reinvested in Wales. There's a risk at GB Energy that gets kind of siphoned off to a bigger wealth fund. We think that money should stay in communities and stay in Wales to ensure that we can greater invest in other renewable projects, whether that's through Trydan, whether that's through incentivising other community energy projects. So reform to that agenda is very much on our agenda, and that's where our kind of sharing power, spreading wealth report outlines basically.
Yeah, that's lots of that I agree with, and that's where Annie Cymru is in many respects. I mean, we're looking very recently at this with Welsh Government officials at the sector deal, and they're reviewing what community benefit looks like, what shared ownership looks like. We've undertaken a review of all projects that have gone into the planning system since the shared ownership policy was announced, and there's really quite poor level of engagement across the piece when you look at the numbers of the developers that are achieving what we think is the gold standard of probably having a written agreement, a signed agreement in place by the time you go to planning. And there's some good examples, and you've got Eleri coming on your next panel, who we've been working with in partnership on that, so that we want to highlight the good examples. I think GB Energy has a role if it's becoming involved in shared ownership, along with Tradan, actually, in setting a gold standard around all of this. Community benefits, in terms of the traditional ones, are incredibly inconsistent, and there's no real standard set around them. You've got a sort of £5,000 per megawatt figure that gets bandied around with various dates on it from 2013 backwards. And I think it's a really unhelpful figure for everybody, because the market's constantly changing. The profits are not well understood in these projects. There's not a lot of transparency around that and understanding really what level of extraction of profits is going on. And let's bear in mind, it's not the energy that it's extracting, it's the money system and the way we run that. We're all trying to do good projects and deliver better projects if we can. So I think it's possible that a percentage is more helpful in terms of community benefits, so that you can cut across different technologies, different market conditions as they change. That might have more durability, but we need to get a level set. And I think there's a strong case for looking at a slice of that going into some sort of wealth fund that is really focused on reinvestment in communities, that gets investment, more assets into local communities, more held in in the long term. So that's building the small to medium projects as well as getting those shared ownership pieces. And I can see Ruth looking at me very seriously. So.
Thanks. I will bring in Jay, because he's obviously indicated. Very briefly, Jay.
Yeah, I'd just start by saying community benefit funds are obviously really important, but I would caveat some consideration about mandating these for emerging technologies like wave and tidal. They're quite expensive at this point in time. Developers are working really hard to bring those costs down to make them more commercially viable, but community benefit funds at this point in time risk inflating costs and may deter things like supply chain investment. For emerging technologies like wave and tidal, we should be really focusing on maximising and maintaining the socioeconomic benefits from developing these projects with high amounts of local employment and supply chain content.
For that addition. And just I have to let you in because I cut you off last time. Please carry on.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I think just to put a sector perspective on this, we hear you, I think, as a sector. We understand the need for community benefit and engagement. And I think, and as Ben alluded to there are some really good examples of community engagement that we're seeing. RWE were referenced, and you'll hear from Eleri later. I think what we will continue to emphasise is that community benefits and how we engage with communities has to remain flexible, transparent and proportionate. Ben did touch on the fact that sort of market conditions are affecting the way that these projects, how profitable they actually are. And there is a need to acknowledge that we don't want to make Wales any less attractive than anywhere else in the UK. And if we put specific stipulations in Wales that make it less attractive to pursue projects in Wales, those projects won't come forward and then communities won't get any advantages anyway. And as Jay touched on and has been alluded to, there are socioeconomic benefits that we can touch on that will come from these projects. And just to tie back to the point earlier, where we're saying 20% as opposed to 80, 100% coming from emerging technology versus onshore, the reality is 20% of a 9 gigawatt pipeline, 3 gigawatt pipeline is going to be that much more substantial in delivering socioeconomic benefits into these peripheral economies, which is where a lot of this activity is destined to happen.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to bring in Llinos Medi.
Yeah, I just want to go on after what you've just said there, Jessica, around mandating and making Wales less attractive. But I've been in communities where companies have offered different amounts of monies on 2 different nights. The behaviour in these communities of some companies is quite alarming. So I do think that we need something in place to protect our communities, because these companies are coming in and benefiting from our natural resources, but actually they're not behaving in the best manner in these areas. So how would you say is the best way that we can make sure that communities are protected and that we're not restricting development in Wales by doing so?
I think there's a lot to be said for community engagement, and it's sort of a real testament to Community Energy Wales and their engagement with projects and their understanding of it, working within the structures that we have and working to ensure. I think a gold standard is not a bad example. It's just making sure that the standard that we set relies on the principles of flexibility. Transparency is fundamental, and you referenced there two different figures. Yes, I agree. That's only going to confuse matters. But ensuring that it's proportionate to the project that's coming forward and that the engagement is open and honest is going to be fundamental. And I think we have really good examples across Wales where projects and developers are engaging properly.
Did you want to come back in there?
Just to note that, there is a recognition that different parts of the UK are in competition for business at the moment, and that's how, GB Energy will understand that. But there is that balance between incentivising rapidly accelerated renewable energy generation versus not being a race to the bottom in standards, whereby the part of the UK that puts in the poorest elements of redistribution get all the money. So just a note on that, and I think there's a balance to be had.
I think that's helpful. I'm going to move on to Ben Lake now.
Thank you. I'm going to continue a little bit very briefly, just on that point there that Mr. Rossiter made. It strikes me that in this discussion of how we balance some of the restrictions or conditions that we might want to place on developers, there's, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking we don't want to undersell the family silver either in all of this. And I was just wondering, for your thoughts, are there any examples globally of countries or indeed jurisdictions that strike this balance more effectively, you would say? And to the point as well, I think that a few people have made about the possibility that GB Energy could act as a vehicle that sort of consolidates, a whole range of the sector's community benefit funds, for want of a better way of putting it, for more strategic investment. Are there examples across the world that you might want to reference?
Yeah, so in the report, we look at Denmark as a good example, but it's a fairly different environment in that there's a lot more publicly owned energy generation. I think in regards to the Welsh Fund, everyone loves to spout Norway as the gold standard, but obviously that pooling money from fossil fuels boat has kind of gone now. However, I do think there is merit to this Wealth Fund approach, and also kind of there's a balance between community benefit funds and those kind of mechanisms of compensating for seeming, costs of housing renewable energy generation in a certain area versus pooling that money in order to do the larger acceleration of renewable energy generation. So I think it's that kind of balance as well, that those communities that house it get some tangible benefit, but also that this is a green economic transformation, and actually we do need to give Welsh Government and UK Government greater funds in order to accelerate this transition. So it's kind of both of those things. And I think the Wealth Fund approach with a community benefit fund / percentage chunk to communities is an approach that could work and has worked, internationally.
Thank you. And just following on from that point, if I may, Chair, do we need to have a discussion, actually, about what we mean by community benefit? Mr Ferguson, you referenced there that there's a review, I believe you said the Welsh Government are undertaking. And it just strikes me here in that the different technologies will have different merits, different advantages, and also different community costs. Is there any work across the world, or perhaps Welsh Government's doing it to its credit, of sort of trying to come up with a universal metric that sort of weighs the pros and cons of every technology that might be socioeconomic benefit in terms of actual local jobs, both for the construction and then for the longer term? Or is it something that we might need to look elsewhere across the world for some inspiration?
Well, I don't think I can come up with any great examples from across the world. You've got examples somewhere where, for example, access to subsidy mechanisms requires shared ownership, so Republic of Ireland is an example of that. I think consistency is really important, and keeping focused on what we're actually looking at here in terms of extraction is financial extraction. There's a value and a profit to be made in these activities, and if we want our money system to support people and back people and build stronger, more resilient communities, rather than just only to avoid the impacts of climate change, then there is a fair share. There is a discussion to be had about a fair share to come out of making a profit out of the sun and the wind and out of natural resources. And I think we just need to be honest about that to start with, rather than try to sort of go round the houses all the time. And I think consistency is really important. It's really important for the community sector in terms of support and delivering projects, and it's really important for the wider sector. So I think GB Energy has got a great role to play in engaging with different nations across the UK, bringing them together and getting a really consistent gold standard leadership on this, and just go back to the point I made about percentages. I think that can really help us focus first on the issue, which is we're talking about sharing the profits and sharing the benefits with society, and we should all be proud of actually aspiring for that. And then I think the other thing about a percentage just does mean that you can kind of cut across those differences of market conditions, locational differences, subsidy differences, and technology differences. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm going to move on to Anne Davies, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very aware that time is going on. You mentioned Denmark, which is really interesting for me, because Denmark undergrounds all its cables, 400, including 275, 132, the whole lot go underground. And we're very aware at the moment that the Welsh Government, in fairness, have commissioned an independent piece of work, and the Independent Advisory Group are looking at the costings of undergrounding versus pylons, cable plough, open cut and pylons. So three groups of costings are going on there. So I'm just wondering, and we don't know what the result of that piece of work is going to be, but where does that then sit with GB Energy's plans and Cymru's plans? Where does it sit if the IAG comes out with costings which are cost comparable, say, to cable ploughing and pylons? How would that affect policy, really, I suppose, between GB Energy and Cymru? Sorry if that's a bit technical, but it's important to know.
Would you like to ask?
Whoever fancies taking it, actually. And everybody's quiet. But it's a policy question, falle Mr Rossiter, falle.
I don't have a particular, technical expertise on undergrounding of cables or not. What I would say is that, you can't bludgeon communities into housing infrastructure in their community, and I think that's where we need to be a bit more tangible in terms of what the benefit will be. Whether that's undergrounding of cables, I don't know, might be part of the mix. I don't have the expertise to advise on that, but I would say that there's understandable friction, and we need to come over that friction if we're going to deliver at the pace needed.
Thank you.
Is anyone, Jay, did you want to come in?
There are pros and cons to whether your cables are going to be on pylons or undergrounded. Cost is certainly one aspect, disruption is another. So I live in a community where underground cables are currently being replaced, and they've been being dug up for close to 3 years now. So there are different metrics that need to be considered with the effects that these different forms of infrastructure are going to have on communities. So I would urge caution that visual impact is the only concern for communities, because there is significant disruption for burying them as well, and then obviously cost needs to be considered as well.
I'm going to briefly come back on that. Cable plough, if you're agriculturally minded at all, is very much like mole ploughing. Cut in the ground, cables are in. 1 kilometre a day can be done with favourable conditions. So it's nothing like the open cut traditional method, which I fully agree would probably be 7 to 10 times more expensive. But cable plough seems to me to be a very viable option for Welsh overhead or for cable ploughing.
All I would urge is holistic consideration of all the factors on a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely, and I take that on board, absolutely.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Llŷn Medi, please.
Yeah, thank you. My question here is more about, are there any areas in which the Great British Energy could help resolve the current blockage or challenges we face in Wales? I'm going to say this as someone that offered 5 amendments to the Great British Energy Bill, and they weren't. One of them was a quota for marine energy, another one was mandating community benefit and local ownership. So everything's been said today. Unfortunately, the amendments weren't accepted. But if the UK government for the example of new emerging technologies now, which you mentioned earlier on, is there any way, do you find there's any blockages within the Great British Energy that's promoting innovative energy production as we move forward?
I'm not sure if there's any blockages within GB Energy itself, but there are blockages for the energy sector that GB Energy could step in and fulfill a niche. At the moment, it's not commercially attractive to develop sites for these new emerging marine renewables. So taking on a role to develop sites through building in the grid infrastructure, achieving the environmental consents, to then bring in the technology developers would be really beneficial in bringing the sector forward.
Yeah, just it's that role of de-risking, isn't it, of those more risky, innovative projects, and also those are the ones that could have long-term, large-scale economic benefit, in that if we're trying to develop Wales as a niche area of expertise that has the skills to develop what could be innovative projects and use them as an export industry and be world-leading, the benefits are larger. And that's why I'm glad that GB Energy has that principle of, if you're investing, they're going to keep a percentage of the profits of those projects as well. And just a slight sidebar, but I'm really glad to see the mission-led approach that the UK government are taking to this challenge. I do think that having this more collaborative approach, but where businesses are in the room with ministers co-creating what is the pathways forward is a really positive sign, and I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Benedict, did you want, and then I'll bring in Jessica.
Yeah, I think just to make a mention of Annie Cymru here, certainly at the local scale, the focus of Annie Cymru on smart local energy systems and the work that it's doing there, but also other work streams at Annie Cymru that are really looking at how we can move across the vectors of the energy system, how community energy can move into heat and move into power. I think more collaboration with local authorities, so GB Energy can certainly facilitate and possibly mandate that, but it needs to recognise the unique challenges that local authorities have that have blocked that sort of partnership working, and opportunities then in those partnerships to access more UKRI funds, that sort of thing, for innovation. We could bring a lot more of that to Wales than we have done historically, probably to be then moving, really looking at supply chain opportunities, at repowering opportunities. There's quite a lot that's not resourced at the moment that Annie Cymru's looking at. And to note that Annie Cymru's just distributed, or just had a grant call for £10 million, and that has crossed from the community sector into the private sector, and is encouraging innovation from businesses and partnerships. So I think there's some good learning to GB Energy from Annie Cymru, and it would be good to see that supported and consistent.
Jessica.
I think firstly, just to add to Ben's comment there, I think, so as far as I understand it, GB Energy has sort of set aside 3.4 billion of the funds for community energy. And I think if that is specifically dedicated to community energy and supporting projects like Annie Cymru are bringing forward, then the innovation that we see in smart local energy systems and the like is going to be multiplied magnificently. And you referenced 10 million from Welsh Government there. This pot is considerably bigger. That wasn't the main point I wanted to make, though. Just to take it back to emerging technology, and whilst not tidal related, I think floating wind is a key opportunity here for Wales, and the link between GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund, the working kind of in conjunction will enable greater attention and delivery of crucial infrastructure in our ports. And that is, as I said earlier, the gateway to our marine environment, and the gateway to realising supply chain, local supply chain, local content, delivery of socioeconomic benefits in Wales, and anchoring us as with a competitive advantage across the world. And that fundamentally, at the right time and in the right place, can lead to delivery of critical projects such as the test and demo projects, where we're seeing stalling at the moment in the Celtic Sea. So sort of fast-paced, accelerated delivery of critical port infrastructure will enable projects like that to come forward.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the panel for your knowledge and your detailed answers this morning. Thank you very much to Jessica Hooper, Jay Sheppard, Joe Rossiter and Benedict Ferguson for your time. And I'm going to suspend the session now as we get in our second panel, but I need to remind the panel that the public gallery remains open. Order. And good morning to our second panel this morning. Thank you very much for joining us. We have Emily Hinshelwood online, and then we have Eleri Davies and Ffion Davies as well in the room. Not related, I take it. No. There we are. That's fine. Thank you very much. So, and I know you've been in the public gallery earlier on to listen to the first panel, so I'm sure you're going to augment and expand on the answers, which will be great. As we carry on our look at energy across Wales. So I'm going to ask a more general question to start with about the most significant barriers that could prevent Wales from reaching the clean energy targets. And where do you think that developers could actually redirect their investment if these issues aren't resolved? And has this already started to happen? Shall I start with Eleri, please?
Yes, that's fine. I guess I won't add to what Jess said, because Jess has sort of covered all the topics that we face as an industry in Wales. If you look at a renewable energy project, you need three things. So you need grid, you need a consent, and you need a route to market. So grid is a challenge. It's partly devolved to Wales as an issue. It's partly reserved, so it kind of sits in both camps. Consents for onshore wind and most solar projects are devolved to the Welsh ministers, so that is wholly within the Welsh ministers' control. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the blockages now. So it's as well as the speed of consenting, we also have issues with what I like to call obstacles, barriers, hurdles, and moving goalposts, which is essentially you're setting off in one direction and then your policy changes, so you have to adjust your project, which just delays process, adds cost, and makes it quite a challenging place to develop at the moment. So, and I guess in terms of where the investment is going, at the moment I work for RWE. We're developing onshore wind and solar and storage projects. The department I work in anyway. We also have offshore and other technologies. At the moment, we have 14 projects under construction. 3 of them onshore wind in Scotland, 11 solar in England. Between them, they're over £500 million investment, and none of that investment is coming to Wales at the moment.
Isn't it? Thank you. And I was most remiss, I did not ask you to introduce yourself. So, Ffion, would you like to introduce yourself first before you go on to answer the question?
Yeah, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Ffion Davies, External Affairs Manager for Wales at EDF Renewables. We're one of the leading renewable energy companies with approximately 1.5 gigawatts of operational projects. And in Wales, our office is in Cardiff and service centre in Aberystwyth to operate and maintain our onshore wind farms. Do you want me to introduce myself?
So, I'm Eleri Davies, Head of Onshore Wind Development, covering Wales and more recently England, because that's opened up again in the UK now. RWE, biggest energy producer in Wales, and I'm also on the Onshore Wind Task Force, representing RWE.
Thank you. Emily, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Emily Hinshelwood. I'm co-founder of Awel, Aman, Tawe community energy charity in Aman Valley. We set up 26 years ago and have developed 2 of the largest renewable energy cooperatives in the UK. We've got a wind farm co-op, Awel, and a solar co-op, Eleri. We've installed roughly 10 megawatts of power and work closely with 2 local authorities in Wales, Newport and Pembrokeshire. So we've built our own wind farm, but we're also involved in 2 shared ownership schemes with private developers. So from the sale of the electricity, we bring in roughly £100,000 to £200,000 a year into community projects, and we employ 18 people in our area.
Thank you, Emily. I'm going to go back to Ffion now. If you can remember the question, that would be really helpful if you could.
Yes, of course. I think in Wales we've got great ambition for delivering renewable energy and really significant potential. The key challenges we've heard from this morning, grid and planning. So whilst these challenges are felt across the 4 nations, there are particularities that are unique to Wales. Planning is devolved in Wales, and with the Planning Policy Wales stepwise approach, there is room for interpretation, and that lack of clarity does cause delays to our projects, which are costly, but also not bringing forward the benefits that Wales needs from renewable energy projects. We would welcome further clarity, and particularly on the in relation to peat. We'd welcome the peat planning policy that Welsh Government are working on. In relation to grid, there is a misalignment between Westminster and Welsh Government on underground and overground, and we've heard about that this morning. Reports that have been published to date, NISO and the like, do show the increased costing of undergrounding, and also there's an increase to the detrimental impact to the environment from underground as well. The increased costs are ultimately, either passed to consumers or can make projects in Wales unviable and less attractive for investment. So there are challenges that are significant that we need to overcome.
Thank you. And Emily?
Yeah, so I think in terms of community energy, obviously adding on to what Ben was talking about earlier, so opposition is a big one, and the capacity for community energy organisations to scale up, I think, is a big one, because obviously there's finance, and there's, as Ben was saying earlier about, you can't sort of put installations everywhere. Your location is where you want to put your installations, so you don't have a big area to cover. But so the capacity in terms of finance and understanding of the network, and this early in the project, the sort of the risks that you have to take to get a project through planning is huge and costly. So finance is a massive one, and the sort of the project, obviously in Wales, Welsh Government Energy Service is really, and Only Cymru really supportive of local energy. In terms of GB Energy, the opportunity to channel support through them is huge, and we would really welcome that, to work within existing structures.
Thank you, Emily. I'm going to hand over to Anne Davies now.
Just coming up, picking up on what Ffion said, really, I think what we all need to remember is that if we want a successful green energy project, be it a wind farm, a solar farm, a marine project, whatever, you have to bring the community with you. And once you do that, if everybody can crack that, then there's most of the barriers fall away then, really, don't they? But coming back to what you said, considering the range of devolved, and you mentioned this, Ffion, i fod yn honest, and reserved interventions that operate across the renewable sector, the policies differ from Wales and England, and the work of the IAG, coming back to that, because, it'd be interesting to see if you have an understanding of policy differs between Wales and Great British Energy. If the IAG comes out with figures which are cost comparable, say cable plough versus pylons, where do you think that will move this forward? Because a lot of the barriers on landowners at the moment that are not allowing people on the ground to do surveys for pylons, for example, if this is cost comparable, then those barriers will fall away. But at the moment, those barriers are there. Whether we like it or not, they're there. So how can we get over that? Because this is not moving forward at the moment, is it?
So I think what we need is that acceleration to the grid, and if it means allowing us to connect our projects which are shovel ready sooner, that's far better for Wales and bringing benefits to communities. There is a grid poverty in mid Wales. You know, there's lack of connectivity that impacts our projects as a developer, also businesses, you know, that want to expand. Mid Wales is a fantastic place to work and to operate, and there's that lack of connectivity which is allowing businesses to, you know, to come to Mid Wales. We have a pipeline of projects which we can deliver a lot sooner than the grid transmission will be delivered. So that's you know, anything we can do to accelerate on that will bring benefit to Welsh communities in terms of green megawatts, but also jobs and investment.
You want to come in with Eleri? Did you want to come in?
I can come in on the cost comparable point, I guess. I think you're the expert on cable ploughing, but as far as I understand it, cable ploughing is only really appropriate for lower voltage cables. I'll stand corrected.
Let's have a question rather than a debate today.
I'll just say that the cable plough in Denmark, which is and they've cable plough 400 kilovolts in Denmark. So
okay. Yeah, and I think the thing to understand as well is at the moment, I think 15 to 20% of UK grid is already undergrounded. The starting point under the Holford rules, which is what the UK government policy works to, is to start overhead and then underground where that mitigation is needed. So I think we just need a kind of a sensible approach on a case-by-case basis. And I'm not saying all grid should be overhead. I'm just saying that we just need to have that sensible discussion. And as you say, bring the communities with us, have those conversations.
Emily, did you want to come in there? And then I'll bring in David.
I think in terms of bringing communities on board, I mean, that's obviously really, really crucial. But I know there was a discussion earlier about community benefits and stuff, but I think the whole Welsh Government support of shared ownership is absolutely, along the right lines, because communities will benefit far more if there is shared ownership of a scheme. And then we were talking about jobs as well, and I think the kind of education pathways need to be thought through as well in terms of bringing jobs to local people and in communities. We've got to see those sort of the right kind of education and career pathways in place as well, so that as we scale up, we've got local people that are able to do the jobs in our communities.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in David Chadwick.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, on this point about community consent, and Ffion, picking up on your point, there was a point that was made in the previous panel, I believe it was by Joe, who said that communities can't feel bludgeoned into accepting these projects, and that certainly is how communities feel. I mean, people in Radnorshire, for example, can raise examples in the Cotswolds where they currently have pylons, but National Grid is putting the energy cable, taking down the pylons and putting the energy cables underground. So why are big developers not capable or able to do the same in Mid Wales when they can do that in the Cotswolds?
So on the grid, that's what NISO are looking at, and the grid transmission is not something that as developers we would have direct control of. I don't know if you want to come in.
Yeah, I think the pylon debate will go on forever. I'm sure. So I'm just going to. Would you like to ask another question, David?
In follow up to number 8.
Yes, that would be lovely.
Follow up to number, or do you want me to move on to question
number
9?
Question number 9. Question, that would be lovely.
A question for Emily. Based on your experiences of making a community energy charity work, does Wales currently have the conditions to foster a successful community energy ecosystem?
There are some very strong community energy organisations in Wales, as Ben was talking about earlier, and Community Energy Wales represents a consortium of very strong community energy organisations, and we have the support of Welsh Government energy sector and now with Ynni Cymru as well. But I think community energy is a kind of poor cousin of renewable energy, and it doesn't have the status. And I really feel that we need to kind of raise the status of community energy, making a kind of requirement that local authorities and developers set up a partnership with community energy so that we can deliver renewable energy that is appropriate to the relevant community, within communities, and also putting money back into communities. So it took us 19 years to get our wind farm up, due to, obviously conditions were different when we first started in 1998. But it's a huge ecosystem to learn your way around as a community. You're not necessarily trained at the start with the whole network of the grid connections and wind speed and environmental impacts and all the things that have to be learned when you're working on a project. And obviously the sort of 10 or so community energy organisations in Wales who have been through all this and are very, very committed and experienced at setting up projects can act as mentors and supporters for other communities that want to develop. But there needs to be like a robust kind of programme whereby the community energy sector is supported to support other communities. And as I said earlier, the commitment that local authorities and developers will work with communities in a significant way, not just community benefit funds. So I'd say, there are the ecosystem is there, but it needs support and strengthening and finance.
Thank you very much. And we've heard a lot today about community benefits. I mean, you've obviously got some very tangible examples of those. I think you mentioned that you employ 16 people. I was wondering if you could just tell us a bit more about the community benefits that you've been able to provide through your scheme.
Okay, yeah. So as I said, we've set up 2 renewable energy co-ops, so wind co-op and a solar co-op. The wind farm itself brings in sort of between £100,000 and £200,000 a year, which goes directly into community projects. We run an education programme across South Wales, and we work with schools on which we put solar panels. We are currently renovating the primary school which closed. It was one of the last community spaces in one of the villages. So we bought the school and we've spent 5 years retrofitting it and doing it up so that it's a low carbon community hub, and it will be one of the only community spaces in the area. So that has solar, 90 kilowatts of solar and 50 kilowatt ground source heating system, which will be a hub to support the community, but it will also be a flagship project to show what you can do with an old stone building, and how you can turn it into, we're hoping for net zero by 2030, and it's a demonstration of how communities can really address decarbonisation in the areas. So we're about to recruit another 5 people to run Cwbagors, which is the name of the centre, and we're really proud of it. We've had lots of communities contact us to support them to do a similar thing, especially in our area where there are schools being closed all through the valleys, because they're building sort of super schools, and so a lot of the sort of small stone built kind of 20th century schools are closing, and we don't have to knock them down, which is what's happening in a lot of places. We can retrofit and use them as demonstrable centres for low carbon.
Thank you, Emily. I'm going to move on to Llun Medi, please.
Yeah, diolch, thank you, Chair. I asked a question, there's a question earlier on as well, and it's important that we understand how Great British Energy can actually resolve the blockages that you find in Wales, but also from you as well, and how can you support emerging technologies, because I don't want us to be stagnant in energy production, and we need to be pushing forward these new technologies and supporting the new technologies. So can you just, I'm not sure if you feel that the Great British Energy can support these blockages and moving on.
I want to ask Eleri first.
Eleri, yeah.
I think at the moment we don't have much detail on GB Energy. We have the broad ambition, but we're waiting that further detail on strategic priorities and associated activities. I guess arguably, because GB Energy has been discussed for quite some time now, we have looked at potential areas where GB Energy could intervene to unlock that private investment. So we see a role for GB Energy alongside the National Wealth Fund to unlock that critical investment projects, including projects that can't be taken forward by the private sector, things like tidal lagoons that have been discussed quite a lot, but private developers see the return, the length of time for the return on the investment as too long. Also ports infrastructure, hydrogen, transport and storage facilities. So things that can unlock and maybe accelerate some of those topics. And potentially also around the local power plan initiatives around partnering with companies like RWE to invest into projects. And we've just been discussing shared ownership there. Ben mentioned the partnership that RWE has with Community Energy Wales at our Alwen Forest wind farm, where Community Energy Wales will have the opportunity to invest in up to 15% of that project, either at final investment decision when we sort of, just before we put the spade in the ground, or at the commercial operation date. We have similar models for our Penmarch and Eleri wind farms in South Wales, where we're partnering with the host local authorities to invest in up to 20% of the project. So there's models out there, but fundamentally it comes back to the issue that projects aren't moving forward quickly enough in Wales. So these benefits that could accrue, community benefits, shared ownership, jobs, skills, etc., they're not happening because the projects aren't getting through to that point. And the point around the route to market with contracts for difference, we've now had 6 rounds between 2014 and 2014 and 2024. I've forgotten where I was. So in the last 10 years, we've had 6 rounds. Less than 2% of the CFD capacity awarded in those auctions, in those 6 auctions, less than 2% has come to Wales. It's quite a sobering statistic, to be honest. But unless those projects come along, all the benefits that come with them don't come along either. So.
And just to add to that, and the benefits from GB Energy, it could potentially reduce the risk of emerging technologies such as floating offshore wind, and if done correctly, it could support us becoming world leaders in getting ahead of the skills gap and developing supply chains here in Wales, and those skills needed to get us to net zero. Specifically to Wales, we do believe that GB Energy could and is very likely will deliver benefits, but there's currently only an obligation to consult on overlapping responsibilities. There are similar challenges faced in England, Wales, Scotland, and we believe that GB Energy could play a role in that collaboration, lessons learned. There's challenges which are being addressed differently in different countries. We've heard about peat being addressed differently in Scotland, and looking at those lessons learned and sharing that.
One of the barriers that you mentioned is the grid. And do you think that having an alignment between the Great British Energy, the infrastructure strategy and the industrial strategy would actually help to sort of plough on with all these plans, and obviously then get that there's an alignment between the energy production and the infrastructure, and actually making sure that we grow the economy and benefit from the industrial strategy as well? Do you think that would be a good way forward? Eleri.
I think alignment, across the board is important, and I think that's where the new mission control that's been set up by the UK government to kind of align on these things, I think is fundamental. Alignment between GB Energy, Trydan Gwyrdd, and Cymru, it's all important. But yeah, I think we all need to be moving in the same direction. That's vital for net zero and the success of the country.
And just having that alignment and the same targets will accelerate the deployment of renewable energy, which is what we need.
Going on to Ben Lake, please.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very quickly, Eleri, you mentioned something there that sparked a recollection of mine, speaking to somebody involved in Dinorwig pump storage, and the individual mentioned that it was a good job the UK government built it back in, I think in the 50s or thereabouts, because it wouldn't be something that would necessarily attract private investment due to the fact that it's a very long payback sort of period. And I was just wondering there, do you think that one of the roles that perhaps GB Energy could perform, a very useful one, is addressing those, if you like, that market gap of, be it tidal, for example, or other sort of developing technologies, in the hope then that it'll be able to push those technologies along to the point where private investment and enterprise can then maximise it? Sorry, do you think that might be one role for the...
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, that's very interesting, thank you. Back to the discussion here about GB Energy, and you've all sort of referenced certain barriers or concerns that you think need to be overcome, and how GB Energy might play a helping hand in doing that. But can I flip things on its head and ask you perhaps just to name a few key concerns that you might have about GB Energy and the process to date, concerns that you believe that might mean that GB Energy doesn't fulfil that potential. And in that as well, I'd be very interested to know if you've had any discussions with the UK government as part of the process of GB Energy and its development. If I can start this time with Ffion.
Yeah, of course. So, we firmly support the government's ambition to accelerate the transition from fossil fuels to, a clean energy powered system. We, as I mentioned before, specifically to Wales, we would like to see that collaboration, the lessons learned, and currently there is that obligation only to consult on overlapping responsibilities. So we would like to see that collaboration. We have been, as EDF Renewables, we have been involved in discussions with the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and our director, Tristan Ziffel, was given evidence on the bill on the 8th of October as well, so we have been involved in that. We feel that GB Energy will deliver benefits to Wales, and if the focus and remit is set appropriately. So, the governance is yet to come out, but we do feel it could.
Thank you. Emily, and then I'll come to Eleri.
So Awel and Tawe has been involved through the local energy contact group, and has sort of not myself personally, but has been sort of working to input support, and I think also Ben from Community Energy Wales is also on that contact group. So there has been some kind of support also pre the election. With a kind of a community energy group, and I think Peter Capener from Bath and West, who's been sort of co-chairing the contact group. So there has been some input from community energy. So I suppose one concern that we talked about how long it took Awel and Tawe to get our wind farm up, and all the sort of issues in the early stages. One sort of issue that we kind of flagged up was with the power plan, which, if I'm correct, is looking at sort of 600 million. Support to local authorities in the form of grants, and 400 million to community energy in the form of soft loans. If I'm correct in saying this, the idea of loans makes it much harder for communities in those early stages to get things off the ground, because obviously we don't have access to the level of funding that is, or easy level of funding that's required to get projects to that point at which they have planning and are able to then take, get access to finance.
Thank you. That's very, very useful. Thank you, Emily. And Eleri.
I guess without knowing the full detail of GB Energy, it's quite hard to comment, but I think fundamentally it should be a vehicle to facilitate and drive forward the investment, and the topics we've already discussed, but not come in and displace investment that would have happened already. Right. So if it does that, then there's no net benefit from GB Energy effectively.
Oh, thank you, that's very useful.
There we are, thank you. Do you want to follow up on a question, or are you happy there?
No,
that's fine. Brilliant. I'll go on to Andrew. Andrew Ranger, please.
Thank you, Chair. So just moving on to the financing side, we've touched on some of this throughout the discussion already, but just if all witnesses had anything to add in terms of what the most significant financial barriers are to investing in renewable energy in Wales, and particularly the new and emerging side of the technology. So start with Eleri and we'll move around.
I guess I can only really comment from the perspective of probably established technologies, because that's the area that I work in. But ultimately, it's a combination of that. You know, do you have a viable consent in the right place? There's technical considerations like, is it windy enough, terrain, etc. So fundamentally, the sort of the grid costs, obviously a big factor that goes into that. But fundamentally, you need all those things to come together to then be competitive in that contracts for difference auction. And I just wanted to pick up actually on something Mr. Sheppard said earlier about 20% of UK content from wind. I think, I'd have to check with him whether he was, but I think he's referring there to the turbines themselves, not the total contract price. So my figures are closer to 60% UK content, 40% non-UK content. And that's because there are no large-scale turbine manufacturers in the UK. So fundamentally, you cannot buy them from within the UK. But 60% of the other costs, so the electrical and civils balance of plant costs, the grid costs, they all remain within the UK because it makes economic sense to buy them locally, not ship them in from abroad. So, but they're the sort of challenges we have. And then you go into a contract for difference auction and you have to put forward your best price to achieve that against the other projects competing across the UK. And just in terms of the prices that were awarded in auction round 6, the latest one, onshore wind was £50.90 per megawatt hour, which is one of the cheapest forms. Onshore wind, offshore wind and solar are the cheapest forms of renewables out there, and that lowers costs to the consumer.
Great. Okay, thank you. Ffion?
Just to add to that, onshore wind is a proven technology. We can deploy it quickly and relatively cheaply, as well as operate it cheaply. And, it's bringing forward the skills needed for future emerging technologies so that, onshore wind technicians can transition to the floating offshore wind operations in the future potentially. So it's a technology that is available here and now.
Thank you. Just in terms of those skills, just to add a slight supplementary to that, as you mentioned them, where are they being developed? Is that within the firms and companies, or are you working with universities and public institutions and research?
I'm happy to come in on that.
Yeah, sorry, and I will come to you shortly, Emily. Sorry, it just sparked a question of mine when you said that. So sorry. Yeah.
Just in terms of our wind turbine apprenticeship scheme, we have RWE trains all its UK apprentices in Coleg Llanryddelmenau in North Wales. So they're based out of the college for the sort of learning part, and then they're partnered with an onshore wind or an offshore wind project. Can be anywhere in the UK. We've just taken on our 100th apprentice into Coleg Llanryddelmenau. And the more projects that come forward, I think this year was our biggest ever intake, but the more projects that come forward and the more projects that get built, the more apprentices we'll need. So that's how we deal with, and that's a very, that's just the apprentices side of it. We worked with Jones Brothers Rhythin to build our Clocaenog Forest wind farm in North Wales. They trained a lot of apprentices through that wind farm who have now got the skills to be transferring that to other wind farms. Unfortunately, not many being built in Wales at the moment. I don't think any actually of any scale. So they're all working up in Scotland at the moment. But hopefully we can bring them back down if we get a few more consents through and a few more projects awarded through the CFD.
And as EDF Renewables, we've partnered with DP Energy, Pembrokeshire College and Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum to develop a programme in Pembrokeshire College originally, Destination Renewables, and that's really to raise awareness and ambition about the careers available in renewable energy and across a mix of technologies. That programme brings industry into the classroom to bring it to life, and it's been hugely successful. And award-winning, and we've rolled it out in other colleges in Wales as well as exported to England now. As Eleri said, build the projects and the skills and jobs come. We also run an apprenticeship programme, graduate programme. For our apprentices, I would love to see more based in Wales, but as we're building out more projects in Scotland and England, the hands-on practical work is based in England and Scotland at the moment. So I'd love to see more delivery, deployment of renewable energy in Wales and bring on more apprentices here.
Thank you. And Emily, just so the original question back to you about the significant financial barriers, particularly to new and emerging technologies, but also if you've got anything to add on the skills side as well, I'd be interested. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously finance is a massive thing for communities, as I think we've been talking about earlier, especially in the early stages of a project. And then even once the project has got planning permission and it's ready to go, then getting the finance to actually build it is another significant issue. Obviously, we for our projects we set up a co-op, so we have for most of our projects we've half financed it with community shares. So, for example, our wind farm. It was a £8 million project, and we raised £4 million through community shares. But in terms of getting the rest of the finance, we've had bank finance and loan finance. So having support in the kind of legal costs of getting bank finance is again a huge would be huge support through sort of GB Energy, that kind of support to community energy to help to accessing finance to build would be important. And again, with the local power plan being kind of loans, that it would be, having support in grant form as well would be really good. And the whole shared ownership thing is great, because quite a lot of those sort of the early stages of a project aren't, for a community to do that, they're doing it at risk. Whereas if we're working with a developer, a lot of that is covered in the initial stages by the developer, and then obviously payback by the community once it goes ahead. So again, another reason for shared ownership. In terms of education, we work with schools, so we're working with pupils at a younger age than university, but we're finding so many pupils, especially when they come and visit the wind farms, and they come and visit, they've got solar on their roof. They're really excited by renewable energy, and we, absolutely want to see that moving through the education sector and into university. But more support to actually run those education programs at school level is vital.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I'll move on to the next question linked to finance. So, GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund, they could probably enable the public and private sectors in Wales to work together to deliver the scale we need. So basically, how could that happen, or how should that happen? And is the public sector in Wales culturally ready for the risks involved of that? Probably again go to all three. So we'll start with you, Emily. I'll go in reverse order this time.
Sorry, can you just say that question again? Yeah, sorry.
It's how could GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund enable the public and private sectors in Wales to work together to deliver the scale of development we need to reach net zero? And a supplementary to that, is the public sector in Wales culturally ready for the risks involved of that?
I think we're ready, culturally ready. I think there's a huge. I'm thinking about a sort of education level. There's a huge push for saving the planet and wanting to be part of that. I think schools, especially with the sort of the curriculum at the moment, it's really pushing for ethical citizens and addressing the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis. I feel that schools are gearing up for that. I think that funding is not there, and I think culturally probably needs much more visibility of renewable energy, at a sort of education level, so that there's a clear pathway, so people can see. I suppose we just don't know what the jobs are going to be in 10 years' time, but we can plan for them. We can start to see what the pathways are, and especially if we are thinking about much more about the industry of developing the components in Wales, then we can start to put those sort of education pathways together. I think more private and public partnership over that would make it easy for schools to and universities to sort of see what the pathways are. And I think community energy can be part of that, because we're available. All the installations that are already community energy installations that are already are having visitors and doing education programs already, and the visibility is there in the community. So I think that helps the cultural transition.
Great, thank you. Ffion, could you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, of course. So, as I mentioned earlier, we feel that Great British Energy could leverage private and public finance to de-risk emerging technologies such as floating offshore wind, and if done correctly could allow us to become a leader in innovation, building up the supply chain and the skills. I think we feel that if the remit and focus is set correctly, there could be significant benefit, and the focus, should be on de-risking in that early development phase. Also increasing support in communities and providing a refinancing option. So.
Great, thank you. Eleri?
Yeah, I think your point was around is the public sector culturally ready? I think from discussions I've been having with, Community Energy Wales is the third sector rather than public, and host local authorities, Fab, Eleri and Penmarch, they are certainly keen to be involved in the conversation. Obviously, up until final investment decision, there's no risk on the local authority or on Community Energy Wales. We, as a developer, we fund all of the development costs. So there's no risk there until you then do your due diligence to find out. And that's when we will find out whether there's that appetite to take up that investment. But there certainly is a role for GB Energy to potentially provide that equity funding to the public sector to be able to invest. And it's something that RWE's got a lot of projects in Germany where we have municipalities invested into our projects up to 49%. It's not unusual in other countries. I think Wales and maybe the UK a little bit further behind.
Yeah, right. No, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And thank you to the second panel. And I think we have exhausted our questions for you, they should be pleased to know this morning. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. For Emily Hinshelwood, online, and for Ffion Davies and Eleri Davies here in the room with us today. Thank you so much for your time. Along with panel one, it's been an invaluable session for us, and I'm sure it won't be the last time we're going to be looking at energy in Wales. So thank you again very much for your time, and thank you to committee members. Order.